about today, and we've talked about it a lot in the past, is kind of the difference between complexity versus simplicity. So out of the gate, which is a more complex shape?
The second one. Obviously the second one.
Right? It's a triangle versus an octagon. You've got 3 sides versus 8 sides. And so this is, when you look at certain situations, you see one big complex situation and you see one simple one. But what ends up happening when you start changing your vision of things and your approach to things is you start seeing different things start kind of taking effect. And if I drew straight lines, you would see that now really the octagon is made up of building blocks of lots of triangles, right? So now instead of one complex shape, you've got lots of triangles that made the building blocks of something that was more complex. And so this really comes into paying attention to where things are and the systems that things are built from, because you can kind of zoom in and zoom out from a perspective standpoint. And so if you look at this from that situation, then this becomes much more simple because it's a lot easier to change one triangle than it is to change the entire octagon. What does that remind you of? Which whiteboard wisdom does that take you back to?
Pyramids.
Well, pyramid also, but what the system's wavelength, right? So if they, instead of here, if you take that into triangles now, and into this same perspective, that's a lot easier to, remember we said it's a lot easier to change one little step than to try to figure out where the complex problem was between 2 big steps. You guys remember that one? The other piece of it is that if you add, just 4 more triangles, as now you've got a block. And if I could really draw, it would make more sense. So you've got 4 additional triangles, and now you've got a block that you can build from. And when you make it a real block, like we talked about before, what is the pyramid of growth? And so when you're working on developing a system, or when you're working on your personal or professional growth, once again, when you look at this situation, this is a complex one. It's building blocks. So it's the equivalent of, when we talked about the parable of 3 masons when they're laying bricks. The one guy asked, you ask the 3 guys the same questions. What are you doing? One guy says, I'm laying bricks. One guy says, I'm building a wall. The other guy says, I'm building a cathedral. That's really where this comes in as well, because what you've got are building blocks that start with a triangle and goes all the way up to a pyramid of sorts. And so it comes just from the perspective. And so when you're able to change your perspective and kind of zoom in and zoom out, you can start to see that complexity is really just a lot of simple things layered on top of each other. So now we've got a ton of different triangles here that create a complex situation and a complex block, which then becomes the simple piece of a bigger structure. So it's how far out can you zoom, how far in can you zoom? And when you're looking at, even in this situation, people are going to see a lot of different things, different perspectives, depending on how you look at it. So how many different shapes can you see in this? I mean, one you can see at the lowest level, you see a triangle, right? But then if you combine that triangle with this triangle, it's kind of an hourglass. If you combine that one with this one, it's kind of a cross-looking thing. But now if you look at this one, it's kind of like fan blades. Zoom out one section higher, and you've got that octagon that we started with. One level above that, and you've got a square. It's all the same thing, but it just depends on what perspective you're looking at it. And so this is where it comes down to, you know, which is better. A good answer or a great answer? And yes, this is a trick question. It depends, right? Because a good answer to the right question is better than a great answer to the wrong question. Does that make sense? It doesn't matter if you answer the question with this awesome, great answer if you're not asking the right question. You know, and so this is where, you know, we always focus a lot on changing perspectives and trying to make sure that we're answering the right thing. What are we really after? What's really the goal here? And a perfect example of this whole thing here was Ben's handling of the fashion line. You know, so it started out as the right question was, how can we build out the fashion line? The right question was what at that time? How can we more efficiently build websites, right? How can we create websites that are going to be more structurally sound? How can we do a better job? How can we be more efficient? How can we be more effective? So when Ben started working on it, he pulled up a layer, and instead of looking at the triangle or the fan or the octagon, he looked at the square and said, you know, instead of saying what's the best way to develop the fashion line, he went back to the right question, is what's the best way that we can build sites most effectively and most efficiently? And then that's where he went, the question got changed then when it went from should we do the fashion line or not to how can we, when yes, then how can we most effectively and efficiently? Once again, he came up a level and said, once again, what is the best way that we can do this? And what it did is it opened up a whole new channel of opportunities for him to ask, once again, what's the right question? And the right question was, how can we most effectively and efficiently build websites? And so what he was able to do then is come up a layer and build out potentially the Dare Elite collection. And so what that's going to allow us to do is really take a much better approach to even what the fashion line was going to allow us to do, but allows us to do it in a way that's going to be completely different than the original question, which was right, but then became wrong because of a different perspective. Does that make sense? How else have you guys seen the situation where simplicity is layered on top of complexity? Where else have you seen it?
With the KPI things, like I guess we ask ourselves a bunch of simple little questions every week to kind of broadly judge how effective we're being with our work and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we get to a certain place with that particular question, we start asking ourselves different questions, and then we get new ones.
Right. So it's continually looking at so like KPIs are looking at small little building blocks, but then together they're one big thing. And if something's out of whack, then we can tell if it's this block, or this block, and we can go and fix it. And once it's fixed, then we can move on to something else. And so, you know, if this is within here, then we can move on to this one and start trying to focus on improving something else. Where else? How about in your guys' own personal growth and professional growth? You know, and so if it's this situation if this is your, you know, when we talked about the pyramid growth, if this is your growth chart, it's really hard to try to take this approach and improve yourself, right? But it's much easier if you come in and focus on one block at a time, or even more effective is if this block is here, if then you can take this cross section, so you're taking one little piece of that block out and focusing on that one area of potential growth. And so you've got one skill set that is part of one fundamental improvement of yourself, which is part of your overall personal and professional growth. It's much more daunting to try to take on the whole thing as opposed to take one bite-sized piece. Where else have you guys seen this? There's lots of areas in our business where we can kind of zoom in and zoom out and look at different elements and different pieces.
When we do our like mini huddles or whatever, just really the story sharing that we all do with one another, whether it be like talking about issues with projects or just the process of design or development. Like, everybody really becomes one of those triangles because we're all kind of taking our own approach and then turning it into like a useful piece of information. Like whether it's something as simple as like sharing what shortcut key you learned that week, or something as complex as teaching a lesson on security certificates.
Mm-hmm. So all of us are, so in that element, if this is the creative team, this pyramid here, then each one of you is a block. And if you can work on one skill set and make everyone's area right there better, then that's going to make the whole thing better. And then if you look at, if this is the creative department, and these are individuals, then funnel that over to here. And so we've got a triangle here, and this is the creative department, and this is content team, this is the account management team, and this is goBRANDgo. And then once again it becomes, it's like Men in Black, right? When it's all about perspective though. And so if you can continue to develop your skills of being able to kind of zoom in and zoom out and continue to ask the right question, that's where that perspective becomes really powerful. Because it's really easy to just start going down the rabbit hole of the wrong question and come up with lots of great answers. But you always want to try to take 1 or 2 clicks up and make sure that you're answering the right